grainy and absolutely terrible image quality.
Massive disappointment.
Nightmare in a box.
Not worth it.
Without a doubt, the worst $250 I have ever spent.
Do not trust YouTube reviewers.
Camera is garbage, must read this.
Has potential to be great, but
PW513, hard to connect with conference programs.
Those were real comments left on the Best Buy product page for the AVerMedia PW513 webcam, what I'm using right now. That Best Buy being one of the only places you can regularly get stock of this webcam in to actually purchase it. I posted my review back when the webcam originally released, praising it, as did anyone else who reviewed it at the time, because for us who are experienced with a lot of webcams, this one kind of hits basically all of the marks in terms of the feature set, the quality, and stuff we have been looking for a webcam. There's always more, there's always better that we could want or request or what have you, especially when we're approaching, you know, mirrorless quality, you know, mirrorless cameras, big old Sony cameras and things like that. A lot of people want image quality similar to that, although price really starts to scale there. But we were very happy with the webcam because it was really solid for the price. And then once they started getting out into the wild, I didn't hear anything for a little bit, but a little bit after, I got a comment saying that they were seeing some negative review. Well, first I got a comment saying they didn't enjoy it and they don't understand what happened. Then I got a comment saying maybe they had a bad batch. They were being kind of open to the possibility that it wasn't the norm, you know, something wasn't right. And then I started getting comments about how the reviews on Best Buy and Reddit were just trashing the camera, how everyone seemed to hate it, and how people are really confused what happened given that reviewers really liked it. And so people started being kind of conspiracy theory thinking maybe reviewers got sent different webcams, what have you. And so eventually, like, it kind of built up to a head of me hearing enough about it and actually going and looking for myself at the reviews on Best Buy and things like that. And yeah, there are a few negative ones. I do think it's a little blown out of proportion because there's, on Best Buy's website, there's 2 2-star reviews. There are 9 1-star reviews. That's pretty significant. But then there's 10 5 stars, 3 4 stars. Like, it's not like all of the reviews are negative, and most people seem fairly happy with it. You obviously have the reviewer's bias of most people who have a negative experience with the product are going to reach out to talk about it, versus people who have a positive experience aren't necessarily set on kind of going out and reviewing it. And the same thing with the Reddit posts. Like, most people aren't going to Reddit because they love a product. It's purely because they do hate it. And I'm pretty sure I confirmed one of the first comments I got of someone hating the camera. They actually bought the original live streamer camera from AVerMedia, which was the 313, which was not very good. But I saw enough comments, saw enough reviews, that I set out for myself to get to the bottom of it, to see what the heck was actually going on here. And I posted on Twitter and on the community tab saying, hey, I ordered one, this is what's going on, let me know if you have any feedback. And most of your all's feedback was fairly back and forth. One person said it's the best webcam ever, another person had a problem with it. And so we're gonna talk about what the problems everyone seems to be encountering are. I actually got an official statement from AVerMedia and let them know this was going on after my order had already shipped. So we'll talk about that, as well as some possible solutions for you and my A/B testing of a retail sample versus my review unit to see what's going on here in today's video, right after a word from this video's sponsor. This video is brought to you by Nerd or Die and their ultimate stream packages. You can get everything you need to build an exciting and engaging live stream, from overlays, webcam frames, alerts, backgrounds, full scenes, and even game-specific ones like their new cyberpunk-themed layouts, available for really reasonable prices. And if the prices are still too much for you, how about 50% off? A limited number of you can save 50% off using the coupon code VOX50 at checkout, and the rest of you can save 15% off with coupon code EPOSVOX. Head on over to eposvox.gg/nerdordie and save 50%. Upgrade your stream today. I'm EPOSVOX, the stream professor, here talking about a streaming webcam from AVerMedia. This is the $250 PW513. I've made multiple videos about AVerMedia's webcams at this point. I will have them linked below. They are kind of the entry level into what I am talking about here. But I have purchased a new model. I ordered the one that I am recording on right now directly from Best Buy. Zero, input or influence from AVerMedia or anything like that. This is direct from Best Buy, paid for myself, and I didn't let them know I had already bought it until my unit had shipped, just in case someone wanted to pull out a conspiracy theory that they still sent me a magic one. And of course, lo and behold, it still functions the same as the original one. There's no batch issues that I'm aware of, and there's no separating review units from retail units, because that would be very expensive and just blow up in their face even if they did want to do that. Like, to make 2 separate cameras would not be worth the cost whatsoever. So as I mentioned, I did reach out when I started investigating what was going on here to AVerMedia. I let them know that I had received a lot of feedback and noticed a lot of negative reviews and was kind of confused what was going on and wanted to see if they had any insight as to what was actually happening and to see if they wanted to give a statement. And they actually gave me a fairly detailed response. They said, yes, we're definitely aware of users' issues and challenges when setting up the webcam. The issues include overexposure, washed out image quality out of the box, they can't manually adjust exposure and other settings, and a grainy image under low light. From what we are seeing, most issues come down to lighting and setting. On the setting part, we have provided more documentation on how to adjust and configure our unit on their subreddit, and will continue to update users with more useful information. And they have also released updates for both the firmware and the CamEngine software for the webcam to provide users with a better experience out of the box. But there is, of course, much more that it's capable of with manual settings. However, they do suggest that users should reach out to them directly in the AVerMedia subreddit or on Twitter for further assistance if these updates do not help them get a better image out of the camera, which is a pretty nice suggestion there. They've actually already started shipping units with the latest firmware. The one I received was not, but in the CamEngine update download on their website, they do provide a firmware updater tool, so I have actually updated both of my cameras to the latest firmware, one at a time, just to be safe. Following their instructions, no issues there. Along with that, of course, they did provide a new update for CamEngine available, I believe December 17th it was released, available on their website, and this actually added a new feature, added hotkeys for the EPTZ functionality where you had the different frames, which I directly requested both in email and in my video, so thumbs up there. They lowered the default brightness to avoid overexposure out of the box for a lot of people with good lighting, which is yay. I honestly don't know that I noticed that, but I'm here to tell you to kick it into manual mode anyway. They enabled manual exposure controls, and then they supposedly fixed the dark 60 FPS mode that I was complaining about a lot. So that is pretty cool to see. So of course, I plugged in my camera with the old software, recorded some samples, plugged in the new camera, updated everything, updated my other one, updated the software, and did side-by-sides, and the new and old camera, they look identical. The noise levels, the sharpness, the image, the color, it is the exact same camera when you match the same settings. So there's no difference between the review sample and the retail unit whatsoever. You will notice, potentially, that my current background I am filming in is noisier than the environment I recorded my first video in, which was the retro room back at our apartment. I have since moved, my new studio isn't ready yet, so I'm recording in our living room here. I have deliberately left the background lights on here so that the image is brighter and we have a lot of solid colors because we haven't put stuff up on the wall yet, so that you can see what a more empty room looks like. Because really, managing noise in a camera is both about lighting, but also about what your viewers can actually see in the background. So you will notice in my original video, I have a pretty busy background, but also multiple different kinds of light sources, which help kind of camouflage noise in an image. And that's kind of part of set design and image construction and things like that, because it's kind of a requirement with a lot of things. And it is still a webcam. It is a larger sensor than a lot of other webcams, but it is still a webcam, and you are still going to have noise like this, especially when you're trying to stretch up a video to a full screen shot to show. So you will notice there is more noise here than my previous set that you can see, but there's not actually more noise overall. That noise was always there, but YouTube compresses it out a little bit, and it wasn't really, it was masked in my background, which is, again, a deliberate choice you should be making in some capacity. I personally find the new exposure control, which is under the advanced settings, to be mostly completely useless, if I'm honest. This is more of like the Logitech kind of exposure setting. So it's on auto now, and things look mostly fine. This is how it always has been though. And so while it's on auto, I have the manual brightness tuned in here. But if I put my hand up to the camera and start getting like brighter light, or if I turn the light, well, I can't do it, but like, if you start getting more light sources on you, it will actually start adjusting it a little bit, but it is very like not super fast and responsive to the adjustment, so that it's not constantly flickering your exposure like Logitech cameras do. And of course, all of these settings save past reboots, which most Logitech cameras don't do. And that's one of the big feature upgrades of this camera over, most previous webcams, including Logitech's latest Stream Cam, is that the settings save past reboot and you get this full thing that just sticks with you no matter how many times you restart your computer. So if I uncheck auto exposure, I am now in -1, which is the default setting. And you can see here it is very dark and the frame rate is no longer synced up with my audio. If I go up to 0, now it's closer to the original image, but oh dear God, it's like we're doing a drug scene kind of effect here. I don't know what's going on. But then if I go darker, this is -3. Now we have the fluidity of what we had before, but it's dark as hell. So we run into a similar situation where if you just adjust that setting, things get kind of funky. What's actually happening here and why the grain is so high is the gain is set to 0. So you'll see the noise. If I uncheck it, we are now dark, but the fluidity is here. Let's see, if I kick it up to -2, we lose some fluidity. So -3 is the right spot we want to be for the 30 FPS smoothness, but you can't really see what's going on. So then we have to adjust gain. Whoa. Which is literal gain on the sensor to get the brightness to where we want it to be. This is a little overexposed. Probably about there. But of course, this is 57 gain, -3 exposure. But of course, the more gain you apply, the noisier your background is. So what I'm going to do real quick is attempt to get the same brightness with less noise by blasting me with 100% light on the key light. I'm currently using the Elgato key light, but it's bouncing off a wall, so I get a nice, because I only have one light set up, a nice even distribution across my face. I'm now going to point it all 100% light at my face and see what we can do with gain. This is going to hurt. Oh, it's so bright. Oh, it hurts. It hurts. All right. Of course, this is harsher light as well, so we can turn down the gain. I'm now at quality mount, Elgato. Quality mount. Alright, so now we are still at -3 exposure, but we are at 8 gain. Now, it is still a harsh light, so the light on my face is still pretty hot. If we turn it down to 0, that doesn't necessarily make anything better. But sure, we are at 0 gain now, so there is no added noise as a result of gain, but the light is still, very harsh on my face. And of course, my hand is immediately blown out and things like that because smaller sensor cameras do technically have, smaller dynamic range. But you will see the background is affected by this as well because there's no extra gain applied. The lights don't look quite right and everything is dark. But theoretically, it might be less noisy. Is this worth it? If you're going for a dark blacked out background, it might work. In fact, let me turn off those background lights. If you're going for a high key setup where it's just a big bright light on you and none in the background, with this kind of gain setup, you could pretty much get a completely black background here. I would suggest a kicker light so you get a little bit of a hair or rim light going here. So I do something like that so that your hair stands out. But you could get like the full blacked out background going on here. That may be appealing to you, but this isn't necessarily the kind of lighting you want. And again, I am hitting myself with like 1200 lumens or something bizarre. So I'm going to kick this back to auto, which is going to look a little funky, and we're going to set things back how they work, because that's how I prefer it. The point of all that was both to show you the effects of these settings and how they impact your image, but also to show you that you do have full control over your image should you seek it. And this is a camera, when you're paying this much for a webcam that's specified for like to be high-end for a niche market, you're kind of supposed to tweak it and fine-tune it on your own. And so that's what you can do there. I have not really messed with color or anything here, so I'm a little extra pink in the lips, and I can kind of tweak that if I wanted to, but I really don't want to fine-tune that right now. I could even just turn down saturation, but I think it's relatively fine here overall. But I wanted to kind of show you that because if you're not going to go through and fine-tune every little detail, that added exposure setting really doesn't benefit you. I will say, compared to the samples I recorded in my original review, the new 1080p 60 mode updated does look to be a little bit brighter and more evenly exposed than it did before. However, it is still quite soft, and it's still not a mode I recommend using. And that is actually something I'm going to talk about here, is one of the things that I think is a reason people are disappointed, is they're immediately kicking it into 1080p 60 mode, and I just don't think that anyone should be using it. And obviously not everybody who buys the camera is going to be watching my review on it, and unfortunately not everybody who watches my review listens to everything, but I very much recommend it against it because it doesn't seem like it's quite 1080p. But that being said, even the 1080p 30 mode, there is clearly quite a bit of difference in terms of detail being resolved between the 1080p and 4K modes. And so most people streaming and having streaming rigs can probably handle the 4K mode. Even if you're just making 1080p content or whatever, I still recommend using it. And that's even accounting for the difference between MJPEG and 4K versus YUY2 in 1080p. I still think the MJPEG 4K looks significantly better. So the initial conclusion, we're not done with this video yet, but the initial conclusion from my testing so far is that there is nothing wrong with the retail samples. They are the same camera I reviewed and praised highly, and I still provide the same praising and whatever to this new camera that I bought. But I do think there are a few reasons we can identify here, that even some that AVerMedia already identified, as to why people are disappointed. One, they just don't have good lighting in the first place, or they have poorly configured lighting, because bad lighting doesn't just mean you have an expensive key light and you're fine. Lighting involves the actual setup and use of those lights. So for example, this kind of setup with the lights behind me and stuff isn't actually a good way to go for lighting most of the time. There's lots of videos online about lighting and setting it up. We're not going to dive into that here. Secondly, of course, is bad settings. It's a camera that you need to fine-tune, test, and more tests, and get the settings configured just right to get the best image out of it, as are real cameras. And frankly, that's how phone cameras work too. If you want the best image out of them, you gotta fine-tune your image a little bit. So settings aren't necessarily quite right. Third reason is they're probably using 1080p 60 despite my warnings not to. Fourth is bad expectations or poor expectations of what the noise levels are supposed to be. As I mentioned, the YouTube compression kind of filters out some of that extra noise, and by nature of kind of removing detail. So that is definitely a factor at play, but the same thing would apply if you're streaming anyway. If you're streaming, you're also compressing it. You're probably compressing it smaller than I am now. And you are also probably throwing it in a little face cam or something where the noise isn't going to be perceptible anyway. Fifth is resolution differences. As I mentioned, there is a significant difference in terms of detail between the 1080p and 4K modes, but this applies to noise as well. If a camera is noisy, that noise is going to be bigger running in a lower resolution mode. By nature of every pixel on that sensor is kind of represented by 4 pixels or whatever, the noise is going to appear higher. I mentioned this in my last Red Magic phone review. I know this feels completely random to bring in, but that phone actually had an 8K camera on it. And while I thought 8K was pointless overall on a phone, the benefit from that was actually getting super tiny, thin image noise compared to 4K on my normal phones, even my iPhone and stuff. The image was so fine, it looked like a fine grain and was much easier to kind of make disappear by downsampling. So if I recorded in 8K and made a video in 4K, that noise kind of gets filtered out when I sampled down the video. So if you are still making HD content or streaming even to 720p on Twitch or whatever, I still kind of recommend bringing the camera in 4K because you're getting the finer grain, and then the benefits of super sampling that down to 1080p or 720p or whatever you're doing will actually help filter out some of that noise and give you a cleaner image overall. That's generally the advantage to shooting higher resolution cameras in the first place, and why everyone pushes for higher resolution. So that's something to think about. And of course, the last 6th point is I think a couple people really did just buy the wrong camera. Obviously, those aren't the people leaving reviews on the product page with verified purchase on Best Buy, but some of the people in the comments and on some of the Reddit posts and stuff, I do think some people bought the 313 camera instead of the 513. And it sucks, but it's a much worse camera. Going through some of the comments you all left on my threads and stuff about it, I feel like I've addressed most of them here, but I did want to point out that I can't really address random specific users having issues with the software freezing or not opening. Those aren't things I can recreate. As far as I can tell, they aren't widespread. There did appear to be a widespread freezing issue. However, supposedly the latest CamEngine update fixes that. I had no such issue. Software launches fine on every computer I've tested, and I've now used 3 different computers throughout my review process to test it. No issue there, so that doesn't make the product a piece of crap. That just means you didn't get the software working. And then there were other reviews where, even on the Best Buy site, where it was just like, I couldn't figure it out. Those aren't reviews you need to take seriously. I mean, that person needs tech support, head to their Twitter or subreddit, but like, that's not a negative review of the product. That's just someone who needs help. Going through the Best Buy reviews, I was just kind of going through looking for common threads, looking for things to test or respond to, and some of the extra points I wanted to cover. Some of the reviews are comparing the webcam to mirrorless cameras, saying I wanted an alternative to that. At no point is webcam going to beat that. Physics just prevents that from happening. One of the review mentions a lower quality in the Windows 10 camera app by default. That's normal. By default, it's set to like 1080p. It records in some crazy MJPEG H.264 format. It's going to be lower quality there. The Windows 10 camera app is meant to be a quick, easy to use, no hassle camera app, not a high quality video capture solution. One of the reviews mentioned that the camera wasn't working on their 3.2 Gen 1 or 3.2 Gen 2 ports and that they didn't have standard USB 3.0 ports. Again, that's not something I can recreate. On my motherboard, I usually connect it through USB-C 3.2 Gen 2 in the first place. I've tested on every kind of port. For me, it works fine. Doesn't mean you don't have some weird driver issue or conflict going on, but can't recreate it. I don't think that's a specific knock against the product because you're probably going to have issues on those ports with capture cards and other webcams as well. One of the last points was one of the reviews mentioned that the CamEngine, because you have two ways to access the camera in OBS. You have the camera directly, and then you have it through CamEngine. Now, both are still affected by the CamEngine or the CamEngine Lite controls in terms of brightness, contrast, hue, saturation, and stuff. But if you actually add the CamEngine device listing in OBS instead of the direct one, then you get access to the face filters, to the camera tracking, and all of that. And I did, in my original testing, have an issue where it kind of conflicted with the RGB full versus partial ranges, so I did get some weird black levels and stuff, but I have not had that happen since, especially with the new updates, so I do think they have addressed that, or either it was something on my end and maybe they were adjusting a setting they weren't supposed to as well. But that was an issue I had before and no longer have as of the latest update. So just leave RGB range and color space and stuff in OBS as default whenever you're adding the CamEngine specific version to OBS. And lastly, of course, there was a review claiming that the Logitech C920 was a better option than the PW513 after all of their testing. And to that, of course, I say, definitely not, but I can kind of see where they may be coming from if they're being lazy about it. C920 may look a little better in auto mode versus the auto default settings of the live streamer PW513 from AVerMedia if the auto mode works for you in the first place. But a lot of people, the auto mode just gets real crazy with the white balance and the exposure isn't right or whatever. And the C920 absolutely falls apart once you start messing with manual settings. Manual exposure just tanks the frame rate, does all sorts of weird stuff. The white balance does not give you all of the actual settings. It only gives you one of the two settings required to get a proper white balance. And so you can never even match the auto white balance if it gets your white balance right. You can't match that in manual white balance in the first place. And the settings don't save past reboot. So you gotta manually configure everything all over again every time you restart your computer. That is not the case with the AVerMedia camera. That being said, I could also see how someone might prefer how the Logitech C920 looks in terms of focus, depending on where they sit in relation to the camera. I am sitting 4 feet maybe away from the camera here. A normal, it's not 4 feet, it's like 3 feet because my desk is only 2 feet deep and the monitor comes in a foot. So 2 to 3 feet away from the camera here. And it looks fine, but it is a wider field of view and there's no autofocus. I talked about this in the review. Webcam autofocus on most webcams goes from minimum focusing distance being right up on the sensor out to about here. So if you get right here, then maybe the Logitech camera can look a little bit better because it has a tighter field of view, so you're closer in the first place, which helps with detail resolving. And then it does have that autofocus that might actually focus on your face a little bit better than this camera. Some people did express that they disliked the focus settings here on the PW513 since it was just locked off. But overall, I think if you sit at all away from the camera, the PW513 holds up better in that regard. Ultimately, this is a camera that is meant for creators and meant to be controlled a little bit more manually and fine-tuned for your stream setup. And maybe a lot of people weren't expecting that. They hear webcam, they think auto mode. I mean, a lot of people even bought mirrorless cameras and get mad when it doesn't look quite right in auto mode either. And even some of Elgato's tests comparing their Epoch cam and their cam links and stuff between that and real cameras, sometimes their settings are really wonky too, because not everyone fine-tunes it the same way. So I've done my best here to recreate everything that was submitted to me on Twitter through the community tab that I found on Reddit or in the Best Buy reviews, and create a situation where this camera was worse than I made it out to be. Honestly hoping I could find something, and I feel like I failed to do so because I don't think there's anything super wrong with it, but I felt like I owed it to you all with the number of kind of comments of people seeing those reviews and being concerned. I felt like I owed it to you to come up with some sort of test with my own purchased unit separate from the review sample to present it here. So hopefully you found this interesting or informative. Hopefully it kind of helps quell some of your concerns if you're hoping to buy it. Maybe it tells you it's still not the right camera for you. Awesome. Otherwise, I'll have my original review linked in the description below. Come join us on Discord, discord.gg/eposfox. I'm EposFox Extreme Professor. Hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.